"I can't, Miss Maxwell." The classroom fell deadly silent as 13-year-old Jason Thompson refused to sit down. What happened next would forever change Westside Middle School. When the arrogant teacher wrote a complex calculus problem on the board to humiliate Jason in front of the entire class, she had no idea she was about to awaken a mathematical genius, one who had silently endured abuse at her hands. "This," she announced with a cruel smile, "is a calculus problem for my 11th grade advanced placement class." But why couldn't Jason sit down, and what dark secret was about to be revealed? The school bell rang sharply, echoing down the empty hallway. Jason Thompson slowly dragged his feet, trying to hide the physical pain radiating from his back. His eyes lowered, his hand trembling as he clutched his backpack to his chest. The door to the 8B math class closed quietly behind him, and inside, Ms. Veronica Maxwell stood by the whiteboard, casting a disdainful glance through the window toward the hallway. Jason paused for a moment before opening the door, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. All eyes turned toward him, an uncomfortable, chilling silence filling the room. Veronica's face was as cold as ice, her sharp gaze pinning him to the spot as he shakily made his way into the class. "Thompson, you're late again." Her voice rang out sharply, full of contempt and irritation. "Sit down now." Jason flinched, briefly glancing at the empty seat in the back of the room. But just the thought of sitting down made his back ache, and memories of the beating he'd received from this very teacher last week flooded his mind, freezing him in place. "Ms. Maxwell." Jason mustered all the courage he could, his voice barely a whisper, a faint plea. Can I stand and learn today? My back." A round of snickers echoed through the room. Zach Morris, the notorious troublemaker and bully, nudged the person next to him and mimicked Jason's words while clutching his back dramatically. The other students stifled their laughter behind their hands. Veronica raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a sarcastic smile. She walked toward him, the sound of her heels clicking sharply on the classroom floor, each step a rhythmic, threatening pulse. "You're back, Thompson?" she asked slowly, her words dripping with cruel mockery. "Yesterday, you said there was a family emergency, and today it's you're back? I wonder what excuse you'll come up with tomorrow." Jason bowed his head, his hands gripping his backpack tighter, filled with the hopelessness and frustration he couldn't put into words. The pain from the ruler Veronica had used to strike him still stung, and each movement felt like a fresh wound. But who would believe him? After all, standing before him was a model teacher with over 20 years of experience. "I said sit down." Veronica suddenly slammed her palm onto the teacher's desk, the sound echoing through the room, making Jason jump. He tried to look up at her, his eyes full of desperation, trying to summon every ounce of strength left in him. His voice wavered but was firm. I can't, Ms. Maxwell, ... The tension in the classroom was unbearable. The mocking smiles disappeared, replaced by curious eyes fixed on the trembling boy in the middle of the room, and the powerful teacher, her face red with fury. A cold smile slowly spread across Veronica Maxwell's face, her voice becoming eerily calm and steady, with a cruel glint in her eyes as she looked down at the small, fragile student before her. "Oh, so you think you're special today, Thompson," she said in a chilling tone. "If you feel so special, perhaps you'd like to show us just how special you really are." She quickly walked to the whiteboard, erasing the simple algebra problem for the 8th grade class, and wrote a complex calculus problem for 11th grade students. Symbols and formulas none of the students in the class had ever seen before. "Here." She turned and threw Jason a challenging look, her smile dripping with sarcasm. "This is an 11th grade calculus problem. If you think you're too special to follow the rules, Try solving this in 5 minutes, or you'll get a week of detention." Laughter rippled through the room, and every eye was glued to Jason, waiting for him to fail spectacularly. Zach pretended to wipe away tears, mimicking Jason's desperate expression. Jason stood there, frozen, staring at the unfamiliar formulas on the board. But within his fearful gaze, there was a flicker of recognition. The symbols on the board weren't strange to him. Actually, this was something Jason had taught himself in the late hours of the night at the public library over the past year. A hidden talent was slowly awakening beneath the fear and pain. No one in the room, least of all Miss Veronica Maxwell, could have known that today her attempt to humiliate Jason would be the very moment that awakened the mathematical genius within him. Jason slowly let go of his backpack, took a deep breath, and walked toward the board. His heart raced, but his steps were no longer shaky. Under the gazes of doubt, mockery, and curiosity from everyone in the room, Jason picked up a whiteboard marker and began to write. A heavy silence fell over the classroom. No one realized that this moment, in this small classroom, would change both Jason Thompson's life and Westside Middle School forever. The sound of the marker gliding smoothly over the whiteboard was steady and deliberate. But in Jason's mind, each stroke felt like a knife cutting into the pain still throbbing in his back. He took a deep breath, focusing on the math formulas to push away the sharp ache spreading down his spine. He knew that just one moment of weakness, one sign of trembling, and the mocking eyes of his classmates and Miss Veronica would immediately crush the little self-respect he had left. The bitter memories of the previous week flooded back clearly. Jason couldn't stop the image of himself standing before Miss Maxwell, enduring each cruel lash of the ruler hitting his back. All because he failed to quickly solve a simple algebra problem on the board. The mocking laughter of his classmates mixed with the sound of the ruler slamming down, and Veronica's cold, indifferent face haunted Jason's dreams that night. After that brutal beating, Jason could no longer let anyone know about his injury, not even his parents. He was afraid that if they found out the truth, they would make a scene at the school out of concern. His father, David Thompson, was a construction worker, always working overtime, exhausted and struggling to save money for Jason and his younger sister. His mother, Amanda, was a nurse's aide at a local hospital, coming home late with the weight of her own fatigue and worries. Jason didn't want to add to their burden, so he silently bore the pain on his own, hiding the truth behind a facade of normalcy whenever he was home. Sometimes, during the quiet of late nights, he would stare at complicated math formulas, and they would ease his mind, if only for a moment. Math became a different world, one where he could escape the harsh reality, where everything was logical, clear, unlike the injustices at school. Well, look at that, guys. The genius is doing math. Zach Morris's mocking voice snapped Jason back to reality. Zach, always wearing a smug grin, had long made teasing Jason his favorite pastime. He always found new ways to belittle and humiliate him during every class. Jason had to endure the bullying because if he reacted, Ms. Veronica would immediately punish him. Something Zach knew well and exploited to his advantage. Jason glanced down at the class, catching the cold stare of Ms. Veronica. His heart tightened. He knew that behind her proud and stern expression was a woman who was cold, ruthless, and terrifying. Veronica Maxwell was a well-known, strict teacher at Westside Middle School. In over 2 decades of teaching, she had built a reputation for her iron discipline and high achievements. But few knew that her harsh methods had instilled fear and inflicted harm on many generations of students. To Veronica, the best students were not the smartest, but those who would bow down and blindly obey her orders. As Jason finished the last strokes on the board, he turned, avoiding the scrutinizing, mocking gaze of his teacher. He quietly stepped aside, bracing himself for the judgment he knew would never be fair. Veronica walked up, glancing over Jason's work with a look of disdainful skepticism. She smirked coldly and spoke loudly for the whole class to hear. "Who do you think you're fooling, Thompson? You must have memorized the solution from somewhere. A poor student like you, always late and irresponsible. How could you have done this problem on your own?" Laughter erupted from the class. Zach pretended to clap sarcastically, his eyes gleaming with amusement as he watched Jason squirm with embarrassment and helplessness. Jason stood motionless, his heart aching, but this time he had no defense. He realized that no matter how good he was, he would always remain a victim of prejudice, a powerless figure before the absolute authority of his teacher. Veronica stepped closer, snatching the paper from Jason's hands, crumpling it roughly in her fist. Her eyes gleamed with menacing intent. "If I see any more cheating like this, the consequences won't just be a week of detention. Got it, Thompson?" Jason silently nodded. His pride, pain, and the sense of injustice blended together in his chest into an ache too deep to put into words. He quietly retreated to the corner of the classroom, choosing an empty spot against the wall, enduring the whispering laughter of classmates he could not bring himself to blame. As the class continued with Veronica's indifferent lecture, Jason leaned lightly against the wall, his trembling hand pressing against the wound on his back, trying to suppress the pain that was growing more intense by the second. He didn't know how much longer he could endure this, but in that moment, Jason made a decision. He wouldn't let anyone, whether Veronica or Zach, destroy the last bit of hope he had left. His love for math and the belief that one day the truth would come to light. He didn't know that the day when the secrets he had hidden would be exposed was closer than ever. And on that day, everything would change forever. The sound of the marker gliding gently on the whiteboard was steady and fluid, but in Jason's mind each stroke felt like a knife cutting into the wound still throbbing in his back. Jason tried to take a deep breath, focusing on the mathematical formulas to forget the sharp pain spreading from his spine throughout his body. He knew well that just one slip, one sign of weakness or trembling, and the mocking looks from his classmates and Miss Veronica would immediately crush what little self-respect he had left. The bitter memories of the previous week came rushing back clearly. Jason couldn't stop the image of himself standing before Ms. Maxwell, enduring each strike of the cold ruler on his back. All because he hadn't solved a basic algebra problem quickly enough that day. The cruel laughter of his classmates mixed with the sound of the ruler striking, and Veronica's cold, indifferent face haunted Jason's dreams for nights afterward. After that brutal beating, Jason no longer dared let anyone know about his injury, not even his parents. He feared that if they knew the truth, they would cause a scene at school out of worry. His father, David Thompson, was a construction worker, often working overtime, exhausted and struggling to save money for Jason and his little sister. His mother, Amanda, was a nurse's aide at a local hospital, always coming home late, weary and anxious. Jason didn't want to burden them further, so he quietly endured the pain on his own, hiding the truth beneath a facade of normalcy whenever he returned home. Sometimes, on quiet late nights, he would stare at the complicated math formulas and feel a slight relief. Math became a different world, one where he could escape the harsh reality, where everything was logical, clear, unlike the painful injustices at school. "Wow, look at that! The genius is doing math!" Zach Morris's mocking voice snapped Jason back to reality. Zach, always with a smug smile, had long made teasing Jason his favorite pastime. He always found new ways to belittle and disrespect him during each lesson. Jason had to endure the bullying because if he reacted, Ms. Veronica would immediately punish him, something Zach knew well and took full advantage of. Jason glanced briefly down at the class, meeting the cold gaze of Ms. Veronica. His heart clenched. He knew well that behind her proud and stern expression was a woman who was cold, ruthless, and terrifying. Veronica Maxwell was a famously strict teacher at West Side Middle School. In over 2 decades of teaching, she had built a reputation for iron discipline and high academic achievements. But few knew that her harsh methods had instilled fear and caused harm to many generations of students. To Veronica, the best students weren't the smartest, but those who would bow their heads and blindly obey her orders. As Jason finished the last strokes on the board, he turned around, avoiding the scrutinizing, disdainful gaze of his teacher. He quietly stepped aside, bracing for the judgment he knew would never be fair. Veronica stepped forward, glancing over Jason's work with a look of skepticism and contempt. She sneered coldly and spoke loudly for the whole class to hear. "Who do you think you're fooling, Thompson? You must have memorized this solution from somewhere. A weak student like you, always late, always inattentive. How could you possibly do this problem on your own?" Laughter erupted in the class. Zach pretended to clap mockingly, his eyes gleaming with delight at Jason's embarrassment and helplessness. Jason stood still, his heart aching, but this time he had no defense. He realized that no matter how good he was, he would always be a victim of prejudice, a powerless figure in front of the absolute authority of his teacher. Veronica stepped closer, snatching the paper from Jason's hands and crumpling it roughly in her fist. Her eyes glowed with a menacing threat. "If you try this cheating stunt again, the consequences won't just be a simple week of detention. Got it, Thompson?" Jason silently nodded. His pride, his pain, and his sense of injustice merged together in his chest into a constant aching pain that no words could describe. He quietly retreated to the corner of the room, choosing an empty spot against the wall, enduring the whispering and mocking laughter from classmates he could not bring himself to blame. As the class continued with Veronica's indifferent lecture, Jason leaned lightly against the wall, his trembling hand resting on the wound on his back, trying to suppress the pain that was growing more intense by the second. He didn't know how much longer he could endure this, but in that moment, Jason made a decision. He would not let anyone, whether Veronica or Zach, destroy the last shred of hope he had left. His love for math and the belief that one day the truth would come to light. What he didn't know was that the day when all the secrets he had buried would be revealed was closer than ever. And on that day, everything would change forever. Jason gently closed his eyes, trying to take a deep breath to calm the storm of emotions still raging in his chest. The pain from the wound still lingered, but in this moment, his mind gradually drifted away from the harsh reality and into a more familiar, soothing space, where mathematical formulas were always ready to embrace and protect him. The murmurs in the classroom slowly faded, and all attention shifted toward the whiteboard as Jason slowly moved forward. He picked up the marker that Veronica had discarded, his eyes fixed on the complex problem still bearing the teacher's scornful handwriting. An integral to solve by substitution, an exercise completely beyond the reach of an 8th grader. But what Veronica Maxwell could never have anticipated, what even Zach and the rest of the class mocking him could not imagine, was that this problem for Jason was as familiar as breathing. He began to write the first symbols confidently and clearly. Each stroke he made was steady and calm, creating a strange tranquility in the classroom. The once bustling room suddenly fell into a stunned silence. The curious gazes of his classmates slowly shifted from mockery to curiosity, then finally to awe. For an entire year, every Tuesday and Thursday evening, while his friends spent their time playing video games or browsing social media, Jason quietly spent his valuable hours at the Westside Public Library. No one knew why he was so drawn to the thick books on advanced calculus. During those nights, he would choose the quietest corner of the library, where Miss Eleanor Doyle, the kindly elderly librarian, would often smile at him, offering encouragement in her warm gaze. "Back to the math books again, Jason?" He would simply nod, giving a shy smile in return, and then immerse himself in his own world, where functions, equations, and integrals were the only friends who truly understood him. Jason's love for math began one afternoon when he was only 7 years old. His father, David, was measuring to build an extra small room behind their house. At that moment, his father said something simple, yet it carved itself deep into Jason's mind. "Jason, math is the language of the universe. People can lie, but numbers never do." Those words planted a strong curiosity in young Jason's heart, a belief in the absolute truth hidden behind what seemed like dry mathematical formulas. That belief slowly turned into a passion, and that passion quietly nurtured a young genius. 3 months ago, he happened upon an advanced calculus book someone had left on a table in the library. At first, the squiggly, complex symbols made Jason hesitant, but the more he read, the more he became captivated by the elegance of the logic and the convincing beauty of calculus. Jason began to teach himself patiently, step by step. He searched for free instructional videos online, joined math forums, solved each problem, working late into the night by the faint light of his phone screen, careful not to disturb his little sister's sleep in their cramped shared room. One time, his father accidentally discovered the notebooks filled with math formulas under his bed. "What is this, son?" he asked in surprise. "It's just some stuff I'm teaching myself, Dad," Jason answered awkwardly, trying to hide his unease. But instead of scolding or forbidding him, his father looked at him with a proud gaze Jason had never seen before. "Keep going, Jason. One day, your mind will take you to places that my hands will never reach." From then on, his parents quietly supported him in the simplest ways they could. His mother brought home leftover math notebooks from the hospital, and his father often asked him to help with calculations on small projects around the house. All of these small acts nourished Jason, giving him the strength to endure the bitter days at school. Back in the classroom, under Veronica's piercing gaze, Jason completed the final steps of the problem. He stepped back, gently placed the marker on the desk, and looked directly at his teacher. His gaze no longer held the timidness of a young boy, but instead a determination, a quiet confidence. Veronica stepped forward, her eyes scanning each line of the formula on the board. At first, she furrowed her brows in disbelief. Then her expression slowly shifted to surprise, and finally to outright disbelief. She spun around, raising her voice sharply at Jason. "Thompson, where did you copy this solution from? Do you think you can fool me?" Jason gently shook his head, his voice calm, yet more resolute than ever before. "No, Miss Maxwell, I solved this myself. This problem uses substitution for the integral. I've taught myself how to do this a long time ago." A murmur swept through the classroom, and for the first time the looks directed at Jason were not mockery or disdain, but admiration and astonishment. Veronica stood there, her face flushed with anger and confusion. She couldn't accept that a useless student she had always looked down on was capable of such an extraordinary feat. Jason stood tall, and in that moment the pain in his back seemed to ease somewhat. he thought to himself. Finally, my secret can't be hidden anymore. At that moment, something changed forever. A young genius, Jason Thompson, had truly stepped out of the shadows, and no one, least of all Veronica Maxwell, could deny that truth anymore. The moment Jason finished speaking, a suffocating silence descended upon the entire classroom. The gazes directed at him were filled with astonishment, admiration, and a hint of disbelief, while Veronica Maxwell's face slowly turned pale. She looked back at the math problem with a look of panic. For the first time in over 2 decades of teaching, she felt her absolute position of power being seriously threatened. "It's impossible," Veronica muttered, her anger beginning to flare. Her eyes flashed with menace as she turned to face Jason, her voice cold and sharp. "What do you think you're doing here, Thompson? Do you dare deceive me and the entire class?" Jason stood frozen in place, his heart racing. He stared directly into his teacher's eyes, trying to stay as calm as possible. "Miss Maxwell, I'm not deceiving anyone. I solved that problem using knowledge I taught myself." "Shut up!" Veronica nearly shouted, her hand gripping the marker so tightly that the veins stood out on her pale knuckles. She quickly moved toward the whiteboard, wiping away the flawless solution Jason had written, her trembling hand struggling to erase the marks. But no matter how hard she wiped, the faint traces of the writing remained, silently accusing her of the truth she was trying to deny. Anger made Veronica lose all control. She turned back to the desk, snatching the scrap paper with Jason's full solution, and in front of the stunned class, she tore the paper into several pieces. The torn scraps of paper fell to the ground like pieces of Jason's heart being shredded by the cruel injustice. "You think I'll believe this cheap cheating trick?" Veronica hissed, her voice full of outrage and panic. "You, a student who's always late, disrespectful, and barely average, how could you solve a problem like this? You clearly memorized the answer from somewhere." Jason felt a surge of frustration rising in his chest. He clenched his fists, his voice shaking but determined. "I didn't cheat, Miss Maxwell. If you don't believe me, I can solve another, even harder problem." Veronica paused for a moment, her eyes widening in disbelief as she realized Jason was openly challenging her absolute authority. For Veronica, it was unforgivable for a student to stand up and defy her. She quickly regained her usual cold expression, moving closer to Jason with an icy, threatening gaze. "Who do you think you are, Thompson? You have no right to challenge me in this classroom. Go to Principal Williams' office right now to explain your cheating and insolence. Let's see how he handles you." Laughter from Zach and a few other students echoed, but this time the sounds no longer hurt Jason as much as they once had. He stood silently, looking at his teacher with a mixture of helplessness and defiance, but he didn't say another word. He knew that in this uneven confrontation, any defense he made would only make Veronica angrier and result in harsher punishment. Veronica, growing impatient, pointed toward the door, her voice commanding and threatening. "Get out of my classroom, Thompson. I'll go to the principal myself and see if you can keep lying there." Jason bent down to pick up his backpack, trying to suppress the rising feeling of injustice and shame in his chest. He left the classroom in complete silence, with his classmates' stares and his teacher's irrational anger following him. He quietly walked down the long, empty hallway toward the principal's office. Meanwhile, Veronica stood still in the classroom, trying but failing to regain her composure. She realized that deep down, what made her angrier than anything wasn't the thought that Jason had cheated, but the fact that he dared to surpass the low expectations she had imposed on him all this time. For Veronica, when a weak student suddenly showed exceptional talent, it was a slap in the face to her pride and deep-seated prejudices. For years, Veronica Maxwell had believed in the power of strict discipline. She thought that only absolute severity could shape obedient students who would follow orders. Outstanding students weren't allowed to stand out on their own, and the weak students were only allowed to accept their place. By revealing his hidden talent in mathematics, Jason had unintentionally shattered the rigid order Veronica had worked so hard to build throughout her career, and for that, she couldn't forgive him. He wasn't just a threat to her authority. He exposed her deepest fear that she had been wrong in believing that power could control everything. As Jason slowly walked down the quiet hallway toward Principal George Williams' office, his steps were slow but steady, and in his mind there was only one thought. No matter how unjustly I am accused, I will never give up. One day, the truth will come to light, and Miss Veronica will have to admit that she was wrong about me. What Jason didn't know was that the moment he left that classroom, his battle with Veronica Maxwell had truly just begun. Soon, the truth he had been waiting for would be revealed, changing the fate not only of himself, but of the entire school. As soon as Jason's hand touched the doorknob of the principal's office, Veronica Maxwell's authoritative voice rang out from behind, freezing him in place. She moved swiftly, her face still showing signs of anger, but her tone had shifted, becoming eerily calm, cold, calculated, and malicious. "Stay right here," Veronica ordered, straightening her jacket neatly before knocking lightly on the door. She turned back to look at Jason with a frosty, warning glare. "Don't expect anyone to believe your lies." The office door opened, and Principal George Williams appeared, his face stern but somewhat weary. He looked from Veronica to Jason, a brief look of surprise crossing his face before he stepped aside to allow them in. "Please, both of you, come in." Inside the spacious office, soft light from the windows illuminated neatly stacked piles of paperwork, but the atmosphere was cold like that of a courtroom. Jason stepped in, lowering his head to hide the worry etched across his face. Principal Williams sat down, casting a scrutinizing glance at Veronica. "What's going on, Miss Maxwell?" Veronica sighed dramatically, her gaze directed at Jason as if he were a dangerous criminal. "Principal Williams, today, Jason Thompson has crossed the line. Not only did he cheat in class, but he also showed disrespect when I called him out." Jason startled and looked up, his lips parting to explain himself, but the cold and stern look from the principal made him swallow his words. "Cheating?" Principal Williams furrowed his brows, his sharp eyes piercing through Jason. "Jason, do you have anything to say?" Jason gathered all his courage, his voice trembling but sincere. "Sir, I didn't cheat. I solved that problem entirely by myself." Veronica immediately interjected, her voice full of feigned outrage and disappointment. "Principal, do you see this? Even now, he refuses to admit his fault and continues lying right in front of us. He's only an 8th grader, always late, with low grades in math. How could he solve a calculus problem meant for an 11th grade student?" Principal Williams sighed deeply, his face growing more serious. "Jason, do you understand the consequences of lying? Cheating is already a serious offense, but if you don't come clean, the consequences will be even more severe." "I'm telling the truth, I didn't cheat." Jason tried to remain calm, his voice growing tight with despair. "I've been studying advanced math on my own for a long time." Veronica let out a mocking laugh, gently sitting down in her chair, her gaze at the principal filled with absolute trust in her long-established authority. "Principal, I've been teaching here for over 20 years. So many generations of students have grown under my guidance. Do you really think I don't know my students' true abilities? I'm absolutely certain that Jason is lying to cover up his cheating." Principal Williams nodded slightly, his expression filled with some concern. "Jason, I need you to be honest. Why didn't you sit down when Ms. Maxwell asked you to? Do you really think that behavior is acceptable?" Jason bowed his head in silence. His heart ached as he thought about the wound still throbbing in his back. He wanted to tell the truth, that it was Veronica who had caused the injury, but the powerful gazes upon him and her high status at the school caused the words to choke in his throat. Jason feared that no one would believe him, and if his parents knew, they would be heartbroken and deeply disappointed. He bit his lip, summoning what little courage he had left to weakly explain. "Sir, I couldn't sit down because my back hurts." Veronica immediately cut him off, her voice icy and decisive. "Principal, this is clearly another blatant lie. He always comes up with some excuse when he doesn't want to follow the rules. Last week, it was a family issue, and today, it's a sore back. It's completely unreasonable." Jason desperately looked toward the principal, hoping for even a glimmer of trust or understanding in his gaze. But all he received was growing doubt and disappointment on the principal's face. "Jason, if you don't have a reasonable explanation, then I will have no choice but to believe Miss Maxwell," Principal Williams said gravely. "Our school does not tolerate cheating or disrespect in any form. You will face consequences for your actions." Jason clenched his fists, his eyes blurring with tears of frustration. He knew that any word spoken now would be futile. Veronica had used her power and long-standing reputation to corner him, and the most painful part was that even Principal Williams, the person considered the fairest and most wise in the school, was turning a blind eye to the truth. I understand, sir," Jason said softly. His head bowed, despair engulfing him like an inescapable darkness. "Good," the principal said, his voice stern. "You'll be given a week of detention and must write a self-reflection report to me. I hope you take this time to seriously reconsider your behavior." Veronica smiled inwardly, pleased with the outcome. She stood up, straightened her jacket once more, and cast a victorious glance at Jason. "I hope this will be a big lesson for you, Jason. Never challenge my patience or my reputation again." Jason stood still, tears falling silently. His heart ached, but deep within, the flame of his belief and desire for justice still burned faintly. He told himself one day the truth would prevail, and when that day came, no one, not even Veronica Maxwell, would be able to deny it. As Jason reached for the doorknob to leave the principal's office, his heart heavy with despair, the door suddenly opened quietly. A young, clear, and compassionate voice broke the tense atmosphere in the room. "Sorry to interrupt, but I just heard that Jason was brought up here. I think I need to say a few words to clarify this matter." Jason looked up in surprise, realizing the person who had entered was his young science teacher, Ms. Diana Carter. With her short, energetic brown hair and bright, passionate eyes, Diana was known for being a friendly teacher who cared deeply about each of her students. At that moment, her face showed a rare seriousness and determination, her gaze directed squarely at Veronica, unflinching. Veronica briefly appeared startled, her expression tinged with annoyance, but she quickly regained her usual composure. She spoke softly, trying to maintain politeness. "Ms. Carter, this is just a disciplinary issue from my math class. I don't think you need to concern yourself with it." But Diana shook her head, her voice firm and clear. "No, Ms. Maxwell, I must intervene because Jason is not the average student you think he is. He's the top student in my science class, and I cannot believe he's being accused of cheating and disrespect in this way." Principal Williams straightened in his chair, his face becoming more focused. He glanced from Diana to Jason, then back to Veronica, his expression slowly shifting to one of suspicion. "Ms. Carter, you just said Jason is the top student in your class?" "Yes," Diana replied confidently, her gaze filled with trust as she looked at Jason. "Jason is not only exceptional, but he's a true talent. Last year at the school science fair, he won first place in the entire grade for applied mathematics, with a highly complex mathematical model analyzing plant growth using differential equations, far beyond the scope of our school's curriculum." The atmosphere in the office suddenly became heavy with astonishment. Principal Williams raised his eyebrows in surprise, while Veronica's face drained of color, her confident demeanor completely faltering. She stared at Jason as if seeing him for the first time. "What are you talking about, Diana?" "Differential equations. At his age," Veronica stammered, trying to hide the growing confusion. "Yes," Diana responded calmly, her eyes locking onto Veronica with unwavering resolve. "I can confirm this. I was the one who guided Jason in that project. I was just as surprised as you, but after witnessing his exceptional mathematical abilities and his burning passion, I can say he is truly gifted." Jason stood silently, his heart overwhelmed by the words of Miss Carter. It had been so long since he had felt such strong protection and belief from a teacher. He bowed his head, tears welling up from a mix of gratitude and emotion. Principal Williams cleared his throat, his gaze now scrutinizing Veronica more than before. His voice was much gentler now. "Ms. Maxwell, did you know about this? Why was I never informed about Jason's outstanding abilities?" Veronica hesitated, awkwardly searching for a response. I didn't know about this. He's always had average grades in my class. I really can't believe it." Diana looked at Veronica, her eyes still calm but filled with determination. "Ms. Maxwell, I think what he's been lacking is not ability, but an environment in which his talent can develop. Jason doesn't fit into the rigid educational methods you apply. I'm sure the calculus problem he solved was entirely his own ability." Principal Williams turned to Jason, his voice softer now. "Jason, why didn't you mention the science fair earlier? Why didn't you speak up to defend yourself?" Jason raised his red eyes, speaking softly but clearly. "Sir, I thought no one would believe me. I was afraid everyone would think I was lying." A heavy silence filled the room. Veronica looked down at the floor, for the first time in her teaching career feeling her authority and control slipping away under the honest words of a younger colleague. Principal Williams stood up from his chair, walking over to Jason. He gently placed a hand on his shoulder, his eyes now filled with a different understanding. "Jason, I apologize for judging you so quickly without understanding the full picture. I promise I'll review this case thoroughly." He turned to Veronica, his voice stern but measured. "Ms. Maxwell, I need you to prepare a detailed report on this matter. We will continue to address this in the meeting this afternoon. Until then, I want you to seriously reflect on this situation." Veronica reluctantly nodded, not daring to look anyone in the eye, and quietly responded, "Yes, Principal." As Jason left the principal's office, he turned to look at Ms. Carter, his eyes filled with deep gratitude. She smiled gently, her voice comforting as she reassured him. "Don't worry, Jason. The truth will always come to light. I'll always stand by you because you deserve it." He nodded lightly, for the first time truly feeling the hope and light of justice beginning to illuminate his path forward. Jason knew this battle wasn't over, but now he was no longer alone. And in the principal's office, Veronica stood still, realizing that the absolute power and control she had long trusted in were beginning to crumble, because, in the end, nothing could triumph over truth and justice. Just as the atmosphere in the principal's office began to soften, Diana suddenly turned to Jason, her eyes full of gentle but firm determination. "Jason, I think it's time you tell the truth. Show Principal Williams the wound on your back." Her calm but resolute words made the entire room fall into silence once more. Jason instinctively took a small step back, his eyes widening in confusion. In that moment, both Principal Williams and Veronica could clearly feel the tension enveloping the small student. Veronica immediately spoke up, her voice trembling as she tried to maintain a normal tone. "Miss Carter, I think you're making a bigger deal out of this than it is. Jason's back pain is probably just from some bump or fall while playing sports. Kids his age are very active, after all." Diana looked at Veronica with a sharp yet calm gaze, her voice unwavering. "If it was really just a simple accident, then there's nothing to hide, right, Ms. Maxwell? Let Jason show us whether what he's saying is the truth or a lie." Veronica held her breath, her face now unable to conceal her growing anxiety. She stared at Jason, her lips tightly pressed in concern. A flicker of fear appeared in her eyes as she saw Jason seemingly gathering the courage to step forward. Jason nodded ever so slightly at Miss Carter, his heart filled with fear and shame. He lowered his head in silence, his hand slowly lifting to gently pull up the back of his shirt. Principal Williams watched closely, and as the long, dark red scars appeared clearly on Jason's skin, a chilling silence immediately filled the room. The welts were still clearly visible, dark and bruised, running across his back. Each mark was like a silent but sharp accusation. William's gaze shifted from shock to anger, and he turned toward Veronica, his voice full of questioning. "Miss Maxwell, what is this? Where did these wounds come from?" Veronica's face turned pale, and she struggled to maintain her composure, but her voice quivered, completely losing the confidence she usually carried. I really don't know. Maybe it's from an accident while Jason was playing. Kids, they fall or bump into things all the time." Principal Williams shook his head sharply, his eyes cold and piercing, his voice now firm and full of pressure. "Don't trivialize the seriousness of this. These wounds clearly couldn't have been caused by a simple bump. Jason, please tell the truth. What happened?" Jason swallowed hard, his lips trembling as his eyes welled up with tears. He looked down at the floor, unable to look anyone in the eye. "Sir, I didn't dare speak up, because I thought no one would believe me. These wounds, they were caused by Miss Maxwell hitting me with a ruler last week, because I couldn't solve a problem as quickly as she asked." Jason's words were soft and hesitant, but they struck like thunder in the deadly silence of the room. Veronica immediately reacted, her face turning white as paper, her voice sharp but full of panic. "That's a blatant lie. Jason, you're trying to frame me, aren't you? How could I possibly do something so horrible?" Diana looked coldly at Veronica, her expression filled with clear disappointment and disgust. Her voice was quiet but sharp. "Miss Maxwell, I can't believe you're so easily denying responsibility. Jason has never lied. Moreover, the wounds on his back speak volumes about the truth you're trying to hide." Veronica took a step back, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. She continued, desperately trying to defend herself. "This is ridiculous. There's no evidence. Why blame me? Jason could have been hurt anywhere, at home or while playing sports. I had nothing to do with those wounds." Principal Williams sighed deeply, running his hand over his forehead, his voice filled with both disappointment and seriousness. Miss Maxwell, this issue can't be handled casually anymore. This is a very serious accusation. I will immediately initiate an official investigation into this matter. I believe you understand the situation you're now facing." Veronica felt her heart freeze. For the first time in her career, filled with power and reputation, she clearly sensed the bitter failure and shame drawing nearer. She lowered her head in silence, her hand trembling, unsure of what else to say in her defense. Jason silently pulled his shirt down, his eyes still cast downward, his heart aching but also feeling somewhat comforted as the truth was finally revealed. Miss Diana gently placed her hand on his shoulder, her gaze full of sympathy and sincere encouragement. "Jason, you were very brave. The truth will always protect you. Don't be afraid anymore." Principal Williams slowly nodded, his voice much gentler now, but still serious. "Jason, I promise I won't let you suffer any more harm. I will take full responsibility to get to the bottom of this. For now, please go back to class and rest. I'm sorry for everything." As the door to the principal's office closed behind Jason and Diana, Veronica Maxwell sat down, utterly drained. She stared blankly ahead, her heart filled with fear and anxiety. Veronica realized that for the first time in her life, she had completely lost control, and all the things she had tried to hide were beginning to be exposed. In the quiet hallway outside, Jason let out a relieved breath, feeling for the first time in a long while that his heart no longer felt alone. He knew that the battle against injustice was far from over, but for now, he no longer had to face it alone, because now the truth had begun to stand with him. As soon as the door to the principal's office closed behind Jason and Miss Diana, a heavy, tense atmosphere still hung in the room. Principal Williams turned around, his gaze stern and decisive as he looked directly at Veronica. His voice was calm but colder than ever. "Miss Maxwell, this situation is not simple. I am forced to open an official investigation to clarify Jason's allegations, and regarding his mathematical abilities, I think we also need to arrange a special test to verify everything clearly." Veronica stiffened, her lips pressed tight in bitterness, but she knew there was no other option but to reluctantly nod in agreement. "I understand, Principal. I will prepare an appropriate test for Jason." Her words were still laced with outward respect, but inside, Veronica was seething with anger. She couldn't accept being questioned in front of her colleagues and students. The reputation she had built over 20 years of teaching was crumbling before her eyes because of a child she had always looked down on. Deep down, Veronica decided that this special test would be her opportunity to prove that Jason was not as capable as everyone thought, and that it was all just a shameful lie. Back in her private office, Veronica slammed the door shut, her hands trembling with fury. Sitting down at her desk, she quickly opened the most advanced math textbooks, flipping through the pages. Her eyes gleamed with bitterness as she thought about crafting the hardest, most complex questions, ones that even the brightest students at the school would struggle to solve. "Let's see how you do this time, Jason Thompson," Veronica muttered to herself, her face twisting in anger and malice. "This time, I will expose the truth about you." Meanwhile, Jason and Miss Diana were walking slowly down the long hallway toward the classroom. His mind was still reeling from the events that had just transpired, but the sincere, encouraging look from his young teacher gradually helped him regain his composure. Diana spoke softly. "Jason, Principal Williams has decided to give you a special test tomorrow to prove your true abilities. This is a great opportunity for you to show everyone what you're really capable of. Stay calm and prepare well." Jason looked up at his teacher, nodding slightly, filled with both gratitude and worry. "Yes, Miss Carter. But I'm afraid Miss Maxwell won't make it easy." Diana smiled gently, but her eyes held a deep seriousness. "That's true. But don't be afraid, Jason. If you really have the ability, nothing can stop you now. This is your chance to prove to everyone who you truly are." The small student took a deep breath, his eyes slowly regaining the trust and strength he had once lost. "I will do my best, I promise." That afternoon, Jason spent the entire time in the school library, diligently flipping through his familiar advanced math books. Each formula, each complex problem seemed to strengthen him and restore his faith. Though he knew the upcoming challenge would be extremely difficult, Jason no longer felt alone. He knew now that behind him were Miss Diana and Principal Williams, people who had begun to believe in the truth. Later that evening, as Veronica sat alone in her office preparing the test, she carefully crafted each complex question designed to break Jason's spirit and abilities. Her eyes burned with fury each time she thought of the student who dared to challenge her absolute power. In Veronica's mind, Jason was no longer just a regular student. He had become a symbol of resistance that she could never forgive. The next day, the atmosphere in the small meeting room at the school was more tense than ever. Principal Williams sat seriously at his desk, with Miss Diana and a few other teachers present as witnesses. Veronica entered the room, holding a thick stack of test papers, meticulously prepared. Her eyes locked on Jason with a cold, challenging glare. "Hello, Jason. I hope you're ready today. This test is unlike any other you've seen before." Jason calmly looked at his teacher, his voice resolute but still polite. "Yes, Miss Maxwell, I'm ready." Veronica slammed the test papers down in front of him, her eyes flashing with malice. "Good. You have 2 hours to complete this. I'm looking forward to seeing the real abilities you've been so proud of." Jason sat down, his hand trembling slightly as he picked up the pen, but his eyes quickly regained their steady determination. He opened the test, and the complex numbers, symbols, and formulas appeared before him. As expected, these problems were extremely difficult, even beyond his grade level. But Jason did not waver. The long nights of silent studying in the library had equipped him with an inner strength that no one could have imagined. Veronica stood off to the side, her cold eyes watching every small expression on Jason's face, fully confident that he would fail this time. The room fell silent, except for the soft sound of the pen moving across the paper. But what Veronica could never have predicted was that every stroke Jason made was not only solving the complex problems but also becoming the most powerful evidence that she had been wrong, a mistake that she would soon pay dearly for. The atmosphere in the small office remained tense, the silence heavy as Jason focused on solving each challenging problem under Veronica's scrutinizing gaze. However, what Veronica couldn't anticipate was that Jason was not alone in this battle. Behind his talent and courage stood someone who had quietly supported him for a long time, a special mentor that even Principal Williams had never known about. The night before, right after learning about the decisive test, Jason rushed to the Westside Public Library, his safe haven whenever he needed peace through mathematics. There, waiting for him, was Dr. James Roberts, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a kind yet sharp face. He was a renowned mathematics professor at State University who had quietly discovered and nurtured Jason's extraordinary math talent over the past several months. When Jason entered the library, Dr. Roberts's eyes lit up with warmth and affection. He spoke gently. "Jason, I've heard everything from Miss Carter. Are you all right?" Jason nodded, though his eyes still betrayed his anxiety. He sat down across from his special teacher, his voice soft with concern. "Sir, tomorrow I have to take a very difficult test. Miss Maxwell will do everything she can to make me fail, I'm afraid I won't make it." Dr. Roberts placed a comforting hand on Jason's shoulder, his eyes filled with absolute belief and deep understanding. "Jason, you must believe in yourself. I know your abilities better than anyone. You are one of the rarest mathematical talents I've seen in my 30 years of teaching. No problem can stop you if you trust your abilities." Hearing these sincere words from his respected teacher, Jason felt his heart ease considerably. For all this time, Dr. Roberts was the first person to recognize and nurture the secret math talent Jason had always kept hidden. He helped Jason overcome his self-doubt and encouraged him to continue exploring advanced areas of math that no one at school knew about. From the very first day they met during a free math class at the community library, Dr. Roberts had noticed something special in Jason's approach to mathematics. He clearly remembered the moment when Jason solved a complex integral using a method that even college students rarely thought of. From that point on, Dr. Roberts decided to secretly become Jason's mentor, not only guiding him with knowledge, but also encouraging him to have more confidence in his natural talent. That evening, under the quiet library lights, the two of them spent hours reviewing the most advanced mathematical methods, from integrals to differential equations and series theory. Every time Jason hesitated in front of a tough problem, Dr. Roberts gently guided him. "Jason, think of math as a language. You are the one who can understand that language more clearly than anyone else. Don't just focus on the answers. Focus on how you perceive and understand the problem. Once you do that, nothing will stop you." Dr. Roberts' words filled Jason with strength and an unshakable belief. He could clearly feel that, for the first time in his life, he stood before an opportunity to change all the misconceptions others had placed on him. The next morning, facing the challenging test Veronica had prepared, Jason no longer felt afraid. His heart was steadier than ever, because, in addition to the vast knowledge he had acquired, Jason now had the absolute support of his special mentor. Meanwhile, Veronica stood silently in the corner of the room, her eyes never leaving Jason for a second. She was eagerly awaiting his failure before the problem she had carefully selected. Veronica could not accept the possibility that a student she had always looked down on could defeat the perfectly constructed plans she had set up. To her, Jason was a direct threat to the power and honor she had built over the years. Time passed by slowly as Jason continued to focus, completing each problem with a strong, clear hand, never hesitating. The most complex equations were tackled by him in a way Veronica had never seen before. The tension on her face began to shift into confusion as she realized Jason wasn't flustered like she had expected. Not far away, Principal Williams and Ms. Diana observed Jason intently, both of them beginning to realize a clear truth. Jason Thompson was indeed a rare talent that the school had tragically overlooked for too long. When Jason placed his pen down and finished the last problem, he gently pushed the test toward Principal Williams. His eyes were no longer filled with fear or anxiety. Instead, they were filled with an astonishing confidence and strength. In the corner of the room, Veronica could barely believe her eyes. Her seemingly perfect plan had begun to crumble before her, and she knew that the moment Jason proved his real abilities was the moment her reputation would completely collapse. Jason sat quietly, his heart lighter and more at peace, because he now knew that the truth and justice had officially stood by his side, thanks to the natural talent he had always kept hidden, and above all, the absolute trust of his special mentor, Dr. James Roberts. The moment Jason put down his pen, finishing the test long before the time was up, an astonished silence enveloped the room. Veronica stood frozen in the corner, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock as she witnessed the impossible. Not only had Jason completed all the complex problems excellently, but he had also presented several incredibly unique methods of solving them, far surpassing anything she had seen in her 20 years of teaching. Principal Williams took the test paper, his eyes quickly scanning each page. The more he read, the more his surprise and genuine admiration became apparent. He looked up at Jason, his voice filled with awe that he couldn't hide. "Jason, you've truly amazed me. This is the best test I've ever seen from a student your age. Not only that, but your methods are incredibly creative and effective." Jason gave a slight nod, his face not showing any signs of arrogance, just humility and a sense of relief as he was finally able to prove his true abilities. Miss Diana stood nearby, smiling gently, her eyes clearly filled with deep pride for the student she had always believed in. But in the corner of the room, Veronica was completely losing control of her emotions. She rushed toward Principal Williams, her voice trembling with frustration. "This is impossible. He must have cheated. Principal, I demand a thorough re-examination. There's no way an 8th grader like Jason could solve such a difficult test in such a short amount of time." Principal Williams turned to face Veronica, his usual trust now replaced by a stern disappointment. "Miss Maxwell, I supervised the entire process of Jason's test. He couldn't have cheated. This is all the result of his true ability." Veronica refused to give up, her eyes filled with indignation. She continued to make baseless accusations. "Principal, I'm sure he must have memorized the answers from somewhere. Maybe someone coached him beforehand." At that moment, a calm yet powerful voice spoke from the doorway. "Miss Maxwell, I think these unfounded accusations should stop here." All eyes turned to the door, where Dr. James Roberts, with his composed and dignified presence, had just appeared. Veronica flinched and turned around, her face growing even paler when she realized the person standing before her was a renowned mathematics professor, highly respected in the academic community. Dr. Roberts walked up to the table, gently picking up Jason's test paper and scanning it once more. He then looked Veronica straight in the eye, his voice clear, strong, and authoritative. "I have been working with Jason for several months now. What I see in him is pure talent, a mathematical mind that far exceeds his age. I can confirm that there is no cheating here. I have personally witnessed Jason developing these unique solving methods." At that moment, Veronica seemed to lose all her strength. She stood still, her hands trembling as she clung to the side of the table to steady herself. In this moment, she realized that all her plans, schemes, and efforts to undermine Jason had completely failed, and no one was believing her anymore. Principal Williams sighed deeply, his eyes filled with disappointment as he looked at Veronica. His voice was cold and stern. "Ms. Maxwell, I am deeply disappointed in your attitude and actions. You've let personal emotions dictate your behavior, causing unnecessary harm to a bright student like Jason. This matter must be addressed, and appropriate measures will be taken." Veronica heard every word clearly, and her heart tightened. She had lost everything: her reputation, her honor, and the absolute power she once held. The anger she had initially felt was now replaced with panic, as she realized that her own arrogance and prejudices had led her to this dead end. Jason stood silently to the side, watching the events unfold before him with a heart full of relief and peace. He knew that, at last, truth and justice had stood by his side. The days of living with false accusations, self-doubt, and fear were now in the past, and he silently thanked his special mentor, Dr. James Roberts, who had believed in him and helped him find the strength to overcome the most important challenge of his life. As people began to leave the room, Diana gently placed her hand on Jason's shoulder, smiling warmly and sincerely. "I always knew you could do it, Jason. Not only have you proven your talent, but you've also helped everyone here realize an incredibly important lesson. Never judge someone by their appearance." Jason smiled faintly, looking up at his special mentor, Dr. Roberts, his eyes filled with gratitude. He realized that from this moment on, his life would take a new, brighter, and much fairer path. And as Veronica walked out of the room in heavy silence, she realized that she had nothing left but regret. She had single-handedly shattered everything, including her career and her honor. As soon as the door to the testing room closed behind Veronica, the tense atmosphere immediately began to ease. However, Principal Williams stood silently for a long time, his gaze deep in thought as he looked down at the test paper in his hands. Dr. Roberts gently approached him, his calm voice breaking the silence of contemplation. "Principal Williams, I know that today's events have caused you to reflect deeply, but please trust me. Jason is an outstanding student, a rare natural talent that I've had the privilege to discover and guide." Principal Williams looked up at Dr. Roberts, his face gradually showing clear regret and remorse. "Dr. Roberts, what you're saying makes me regret that I hastily judged Jason. I really placed too much trust in Miss Maxwell's experience and reputation, to the point where I overlooked the possibility that a student like Jason could truly possess exceptional abilities." Dr. Roberts smiled gently, his eyes full of empathy. "I understand, sir, but the most important thing now is that we've uncovered the truth in time. I believe acknowledging and correcting our mistakes at this moment is the right thing to do." Principal Williams nodded slowly and made his way over to Jason, who was standing quietly in the corner of the room next to Ms. Diana. Jason's face was calm, but his eyes still held a trace of sadness and a bit of apprehension. Principal Williams looked at him with eyes full of appreciation and sincerity, speaking softly. "Jason, I sincerely apologize for not trusting you from the beginning. I let my personal biases blind me, and that was truly unfair to you. I hope you will accept my heartfelt apology." Hearing these sincere words from the principal, Jason felt his heart free from the pain that had built up over time. He lowered his head politely and responded in a soft but clear voice, "Sir, I really don't blame you. I understand that this wasn't easy for anyone. I just wanted to prove the truth, that I'm not the cheater Miss Maxwell said I was." Principal Williams placed a gentle hand on Jason's shoulder, his eyes filled with trust and encouragement. "Jason, you've proven that wonderfully. Right now, I officially announce the cancellation of all previous punishments. Furthermore, I will immediately initiate a thorough investigation into Ms. Maxwell's abusive behavior to ensure that justice is served." Jason looked up, gratitude and relief shining in his eyes. Finally, the justice he had always believed in had arrived, restoring the truth and trust he had long been deprived of. On the other side of the room, Dr. Roberts turned to Miss Diana with a warm smile, his eyes filled with deep appreciation for the young teacher. "I owe you a great deal, Miss Carter. If it hadn't been for your unwavering determination and trust in Jason, we might not have uncovered the truth so quickly." Diana shook her head gently, smiling modestly. "I just did what was right, Doctor." "Roberts, the one who deserves the most praise is Jason. He's the one with the greatest courage, facing all this pressure." Outside the room, Veronica stood alone in the quiet hallway, her hand trembling as it rested against the wall. She felt a surge of shame and humiliation more intense than ever before. Her entire career, the reputation she had built over 2 decades, was now crumbling before her eyes. For the first time in her life, Veronica was facing the consequences of her own arrogance and stubbornness. She knew all too well that after today, nothing would ever be the same. Inside the room, Jason looked toward Dr. Roberts and Miss Diana, his heart overflowing with deep gratitude. He now understood more clearly than ever that it was thanks to the unwavering trust of these special mentors that he had found the strength to step out of the shadows. Principal Williams looked at Jason once more, his voice now clear and powerful. "From now on, Jason, I commit to creating every opportunity for you to reach your full potential. I hope you'll continue to move forward and always remember that this school stands for justice and truth." Jason smiled faintly, his eyes filled with newfound confidence and determination. He no longer had to hide his true abilities, and more than that, he had learned a valuable lesson about truth, courage, and the belief that justice would always prevail, no matter the obstacles. As everyone began to leave the room, Jason accidentally locked eyes with Veronica, still standing silently in the hallway. She looked at him with a desperate gaze, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. In that moment, Jason realized that she had punished herself with her own mistakes and stubbornness, a bitter lesson that Veronica Maxwell would have to pay for. Jason gently turned away, heading toward the hallway bathed in sunlight. It was time for him to leave behind the painful past and step into a future that was more deserving, one where he would never have to live in the shadows again. And at that moment, the truth had been fully revealed, shining brighter than ever before. That morning, the sky over West Side was clear, but the atmosphere in the school's large hall was suffocating with tension. A large crowd of parents, students, teachers, and even local reporters had gathered early. Everyone was whispering about the shocking incident involving Miss Veronica Maxwell and the young student, Jason Thompson. All eyes were on the stage where the school board and Principal George Williams were preparing to make the final decision. Jason sat silently beside his parents in the front row, his small hands tightly clenched in nervousness. His mother, Amanda, gently placed her hand on her son's shoulder, her eyes filled with deep love and reassurance. "Don't worry, Jason. The truth will always prevail." On the other side of the hall, Veronica Maxwell sat alone, her eyes clouded with despair and fear. Her face was pale, drained of life, and her hands trembled as she gripped her handbag. The prying eyes of the parents and colleagues felt like a fire under her, and she knew that today, her entire life and career would be determined. Finally, Principal Williams stood up and walked to the podium with a stern and determined expression. He looked across the room and then spoke in a strong, decisive voice. "Dear parents, students, and members of the West Side community, we are here today because of a very serious matter concerning the safety and well-being of the students in this school." He paused for a moment, his sharp gaze landing directly on Veronica, who was looking down, and then continued, "The truth has been clarified through a fair and objective investigation. We confirm that Ms. Veronica Maxwell engaged in severe abuse against Jason Thompson, causing both physical and emotional harm to this student." Murmurs immediately filled the room. Veronica tried to close her eyes, tears starting to fall from her eyes in fear and shame. The public accusations made her feel her prestigious career, built over 20 years, shattering in an instant. Principal Williams raised his hand to silence the room, and then sternly concluded, "Due to the exceptionally serious nature of this matter, the school board has decided to immediately suspend Ms. Maxwell and will submit a request to the education authorities for the permanent revocation of her teaching license." The definitive declaration sounded like a final sentence, each word cutting deep into Veronica, causing her to collapse entirely. She burst into sobs of helplessness and despair, her hands trying to cover her face as angry and contemptuous gazes from the room were directed toward her. Applause broke out across the room, with many parents standing to express strong agreement with the school's fair decision. In the eyes of everyone present, justice had finally been served clearly and decisively. Sitting next to Jason, his father, David Thompson, gently squeezed his son's hand, his face filled with immeasurable pride. "Jason, you were so strong. Your courage has made everyone realize the mistake they've made all this time." Jason looked at his parents with an emotional gaze, realizing that, finally, he no longer had to suffer the unjust burden in solitude. The dark days of fear, harm, and loneliness had truly come to an end. At the back of the hall, Dr. Roberts and Miss Diana Carter stood together, both smiling with relief and satisfaction. They knew that their efforts to protect Jason and fight for the truth had finally paid off in a well-deserved way. Veronica hurried out of the hall, avoiding the cameras of the press aimed at her. Her steps were unsteady, as if she had lost her direction. Her heart sank deep into an inexpressible despair and loss. She realized that everything she had trusted and built, power, reputation, and fame, had permanently vanished due to her own arrogance and autocracy. In that moment, Veronica knew there was no way to salvage the situation. She had to accept that her life and teaching career had come to an end in the most bitter and humiliating way. The meeting ended with a strong belief from the West Side community in a safer and fairer educational environment. As Jason and his parents walked out into the sunlight, a crowd of parents and friends had gathered to hug him, congratulate him, and offer encouragement. For the first time in his life, Jason felt that he was truly seen for who he was, his real worth and talent recognized. Dr. Roberts walked up to Jason, placing a hand proudly on his shoulder. "Jason, today is a very important day in your life. You've shown everyone that courage and trust in the truth always prevail." Jason smiled brightly, his heart now filled with hope and happiness. "Thank you, sir. Thank you to everyone for believing in me and always standing by my side." Far in the distance, Veronica walked silently alone, her eyes blurry with painful tears. She realized that she had lost everything: her career, her reputation, and her honor, due to her own actions. It was the most bitter lesson she had to learn. And in that moment, the truth and justice had completely triumphed, closing the darkest chapter in West Side's history, opening a new future full of light and hope. The day after the shocking verdict, West Side School began a new journey, a comprehensive and profound reform that all students, parents, and teachers had long been waiting for. The harsh physical punishments that had once terrified generations of students were officially eliminated, replaced with positive disciplinary measures and emotionally intelligent, humane education practices. Principal Williams, having deeply understood the lessons of trust and fairness, took the lead in building a comprehensive support system for students with exceptional talents, with the guidance of Dr. James Roberts. Special programs to identify young talents early and nurture individual abilities were implemented throughout the school, ensuring that no student would ever again have to hide their abilities as Jason once did. Additionally, the school launched a robust anti-bullying program. Regular workshops and seminars were held to raise awareness among both students and teachers about respecting diversity and protecting personal dignity. Signs and banners with the bold words, "No place for violence and discrimination at Westside," appeared throughout the campus, marking the beginning of a new era in education filled with compassion and fairness. As for Jason, after the tumultuous period, he had transformed from a student always shrouded in darkness and self-doubt into a living symbol of courage and overcoming adversity. His story spread quickly, touching the hearts of everyone who heard it and inspiring the entire Westside community. Jason remained humble and simple as always, but now, Every time he walked into the school, he was met with admiring glances and friendly greetings. Friends who had once been cold or accidentally distanced themselves from him now approached with heartfelt apologies for their past misunderstandings. Even Zach, the bully who had caused Jason the most torment, approached him one quiet afternoon on the playground, bowed his head in remorse, and sincerely asked for forgiveness. "Jason, I was wrong. I really regret everything I've done to you. I hope you can forgive me." Jason looked at Zach with sincere eyes and gently replied, "I don't hold it against you anymore, Zach. The important thing is that we've all learned a valuable lesson from this. I hope that from now on, we will treat each other better." That touching exchange quickly spread throughout the school, once again affirming that understanding and forgiveness were the greatest forces in healing wounds and building a truly united community. Thanks to Dr. Roberts' dedicated guidance, Jason not only honed his natural mathematical abilities but also became an enormous inspiration to many other students. The extracurricular sessions he organized to teach math to fellow students grew larger with each session. Everyone was amazed at how Jason could explain complex concepts so easily and enthusiastically. During a seminar on young talent education, Principal Williams addressed the entire school with pride and determination in his voice. Jason Thompson's story is not only the clearest proof of innate talent, but also a vivid lesson in the courage to overcome prejudice and injustice. From today on, Westside will always be a place that respects differences and encourages every student to develop their full potential. The entire hall erupted in applause, with many students standing and looking at Jason with admiration. In that moment, Jason realized that the pain he had endured had become a powerful motivation to change himself and to help change the entire community. As for Veronica Maxwell, after being dismissed and having her teaching license permanently revoked, she lived in isolation and shame. Every day, she tortured herself with regret. Veronica realized that her career in education had been destroyed by her own stubbornness and deep-seated prejudice, which she had once believed to be right. Now, all she had left was regret and bitterness, trying to avoid the scrutinizing eyes of those around her. One quiet afternoon, Veronica sat alone in the dim room of her home, gazing out the window where the sunset was descending. She asked herself if her life would have been different if she had listened more, opened her heart more. But she also understood that it was too late now. Her life had become a bitter lesson for those around her. Arrogance, prejudice, and violence would never lead to anything good. Only kindness and fairness could build a truly good community. Meanwhile, at Westside School, life had completely changed. The school halls were always filled with laughter, and the classrooms had become places where students felt safe and heard. Children who had once had to hide their talents now freely expressed themselves and received full support from the school. One day, Jason sat in the school library, his eyes focused on a new math book. Dr. Roberts and Miss Diana approached him, smiling warmly. "Jason, you've done very well. You've changed this school in a way no one thought possible," Miss Diana said gently. Jason smiled modestly, his eyes filled with trust. "I just hope no one else ever has to go through what I went through. I believe all of us deserve to be seen, respected, and helped to reach our full potential." Dr. Roberts nodded gently, his eyes shining with deep pride. "You've done the greatest thing, Jason. You've turned pain into strength, and your courage has inspired everyone to change for the better." In that moment, Jason realized that the struggles he had endured had not only helped him grow, but had also helped change the entire Westside community forever. After the sweeping changes at Westside School, Jason's life began a brand new, much brighter chapter. From a quiet student who had been overlooked and dismissed, Jason had now become a shining example of perseverance, talent, and courage, admired and respected by teachers, friends, and the entire community. Not long after, on a fresh morning, Jason's family received an official invitation from Westside High School, where special advanced math classes were taught directly by Dr. James Roberts. In the letter, Principal George Williams wrote with heartfelt sincerity, "Dear Thompson family, I wish to extend my deepest and most sincere apologies for failing to trust and protect Jason in a timely manner. This has been the greatest lesson of my career in education, and I promise you, moving forward, Westside will always be a place that respects, protects, and encourages every exceptional talent, like Jason, to reach their full potential. We have created a personalized education plan for Jason to ensure no such injustice ever happens again." Upon receiving this heartfelt apology, Jason's mother, Amanda, was moved to tears. She hugged her son tightly, her voice trembling as she said, "Son, at last, truth and justice have prevailed. I am so proud of you, Jason. You are stronger than anyone I've ever known." That morning, Jason and his parents walked into the grand hall of Westside High School, a spacious and luxurious place where the brightest students from across the city gathered to attend the prestigious advanced math programs. As Jason entered his new classroom for the first time, he no longer felt the anxiety or fear he once did. Instead, there was an eager excitement and a sense of hope. His new classmates, all passionate about mathematics like him, immediately welcomed Jason with admiring and friendly glances. A girl sitting at the front desk, with lightly curled brown hair, smiled brightly at him. "Hi, Jason. I'm Sophia. Everyone here has heard about your story. It's amazing that you're here with us." Jason smiled faintly, his gaze warmly scanning the classroom, feeling like he was stepping into an entirely new world, one where he didn't have to hide his natural talent any longer. He nodded at Sophia and responded with a confident, clear voice. "Thank you all so much. I'm really happy to be here with people who share the same passion." At the back of the class, Dr. Roberts stood quietly, smiling proudly as he watched his student, now so much more confident and grown, knowing Jason was bound to go far beyond everyone's expectations. Outside the school, a large sign had just been hung at the main gate, prominently displayed in the early sunlight. It read, "Every student deserves to be seen, heard, and respected for their true potential." Principal Williams had personally requested this message, as the strongest possible commitment that Westside would always be a place that protected justice, encouraged talent, and eliminated any prejudice or injustice that had ever existed. Far away, Veronica Maxwell sat alone in her quiet apartment. She had stumbled upon the news about the reforms at her old school, especially regarding Jason, the student she had once treated unjustly. A deep pain filled her heart, the pain of belated regret. She realized that if only she had been more open and listened more, perhaps her life would have been very different. But Veronica also knew one thing: the mistake she made would forever be the greatest lesson of her life. A painful lesson about how arrogance, stubbornness, and prejudice bring only pain and regret, never happiness or true success. Back at Westside, Jason sat at his desk, surrounded by new friends who shared his passion for math. The school bell rang, signaling the start of the first class. Dr. Roberts walked into the room, his gaze full of pride and affection as he looked at Jason before speaking in his warm, deep voice. "Welcome to this advanced math class, everyone. This is a place for passionate, talented young people like you, especially Jason, who I'm sure you all know. Always remember, it is perseverance, courage, and belief in yourself that are the true keys to success and happiness in life." The entire class clapped loudly. All eyes turned to Jason with sincere admiration. Jason smiled humbly, his heart warmer and happier than ever. He knew that the road ahead was still long, but now he was no longer alone. Because Jason understood that the light at the end of the road was his belief in himself, in the right values, and in the courage to overcome adversity. And he, Jason Thompson, had finally found that brilliant light. Jason Thompson's story shows us that no matter how great the difficulties and injustices, courage and belief in the truth will always triumph. No student should ever have to suffer harm or have their abilities denied. What do you think of Jason's inspiring story? If you were Jason, would you have the courage to stand up against such injustice? Please share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share this inspiring story, and especially subscribe to the channel to catch more meaningful stories to come. Thank you for your support and for being with us.